This is become one of the busiest locks in the world because there is no way to get from the Chicago River to Lake Michigan or vice versa without going through this lock. That was actually right. You have two sides that are facing the river instead of just one. It also creates really good view. Canada. Those 5 Great Lakes are the biggest reservoir of fresh water in the entire world. More than 20% of the entire world's supply of fresh water comes from the Great Lakes. It does not exist as a result of the lake. It exists because of the river. The lake has always been something, though, that we have been able to use to our benefit. Right at the front. The lake has been something we've tried to use to beautify our city.
Another day here, taking a Chicago Riverwalk.
They go down and then you come back and try it. I'll do my best. I'm insulted by that too. Everybody just keeps interrupting me. That's okay. There are more important things than my feelings. You're welcome to go down to the bar and get yourself a drink, or go use the restroom at any of the bridges in front of us. We're going to be going over. Please do not reach complimentary tetanus shots. So keep your hands inside the boat here. With that in mind, let's talk about the city of Chicago. Chicago, that's what we got from here. Everybody wanted this spot. We got it. The birthplace of modern Chicago. Take a look to the right where those glass walls are right there. That's the Apple Store, and that is the location of Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable's settlement. Jean-Baptiste Pointe-du-Sable was a Haitian fur trader of French and African descent, and he was known as our first permanent settler here in Chicago. And he settled right there because it was an ideal location, right on the river, first in line for all the latest iPhones or whatever new technology came out, right there in the Apple Store. This was the mouth of the Chicago River at one point. The lake came all the way out here. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. If you look to the left, there's nothing much to see there, no Apple Store or anything. But that was the site of Fort Dearborn. In 1803, that's when the United States government built what was, at the time, the westernmost military outpost. And they put it there essentially to say, this is our land. Which was the first acknowledgement of the United States government that this was an area that was worth looking after. And again, it was right across the river from where DuSable settled about 25 years earlier. So this area where Michigan Avenue crosses the river, right where we just passed under that bridge, on either end of the river, that's where Chicago is. This is not fertile ground. Chicago is all swampland. It doesn't look like swampland now, but this was originally a big swamp. That means the soil was not very fertile. It means it was very difficult to build buildings here because you needed a very deep base. Also, Chicago was an extremely fast-growing city, and it became known very quickly for its architecture. If you look ahead to the right, just on the other side of this bridge, you'll notice one of our famous architectural styles. That big, boxy black building is the American Medical Association building now. At one point, it was the IBM building when it first opened back in 1971. That building was designed by a man named Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe was a German who fled Germany under Hitler's rule and came to the United States. He settled down in Chicago because the city of Chicago promised him, this notable architect, that if he came here, he would get the opportunity to design his own university, which he did. It's called the Illinois Institute of Technology. It's down on the south side of the city. And most of the buildings there look kind of like that building does. In fact, all of Mies van der Rohe's buildings look exactly the same. He was a modernist architect. And mid-century modernism was all the rage in Chicago in the 20th century. And these next two buildings that we see here, these corn-cob-looking buildings, those are modernist buildings as well. And what modernism essentially means is no decoration, no ornamentation. The buildings are considered functional, not interesting. Usually you see those hard right angles, you see very dark facades. These don't quite look like that. There may not be a lot of ornamentation, but everything is rounded. And the reason for that is these buildings were designed by a man named Bertrand Goldberg. Bertrand Goldberg was a student of Mies van der Rohe, and he designed these marina towers to be round because, in his words, architecture should be communal with nature. And there are no right angles in nature, so we shouldn't have right angles in buildings. multiple buildings. And if you have, then I'm sorry for bringing up bad memories. I'm guessing most of you probably have not. Those Bertrand Gilbert buildings are interesting as well, those Marina Towers, because they were designed to be a city within a city. He was trying to draw people into downtown Chicago, and he did. The idea was you put a bank and a grocery store and a pharmacy and a bowling alley and a movie theater all in those buildings. People will come in from the suburbs, they'll live here in the downtown area, they can walk to work and they never really have to leave home. He was kind of ahead of his time. Those buildings were constructed in the 1960s. It wasn't until the 2000s where people really started to move into the city. In the 2000 census, there were just over 10,000. This building was constructed in 1914, this red brick building. It's the Reed Murdoch building. I think it's beautiful, but a lot of people hate it. They hate it for a lot of reasons. One reason is because it's asymmetrical. Notice there's more in that building to the right than there is to the left. It's because a chunk of the building was blocked off to make room for this LaSalle Street Bridge here several decades ago. A lot of people also hate that building because it used to be the home to Chicago traffic court for several decades. If you were in that building at all, chances are the reason was because you were arguing a ticket. A lot of people don't like that building for that reason, but it is one of the oldest buildings you'll see, designed just within the last 15 years. And that's really the wave of the future in terms of skyscrapers, because that is a LEED certified platinum building, which means it is extremely environmentally friendly. That building is actually cleaning the river water as we pass it right now. It's using the river water in a cooling system inside the building. It sucks up the water, it cycles it through the building, used in the air conditioner system, and then pushes it back into the river cleaner than it was before. And that's the new wave in architecture, because skyscrapers are not typically environmentally friendly. So they're trying to make a difference. Platinum is the highest you can go. Gold is the second highest. And this building to our right now is actually a LEED certified gold building, which is surprising because that building opened in 1930. In those days, they were not all that concerned with environmentalism in buildings, but they've been able to retrofit a lot of the older buildings in Chicago, including the Merchandise Mart to our right. This building is actually known as the Mart today. For most of its history, we called it the Merchandise Mart. I still do, usually. This building was the biggest in the world at the time that it was built in 1930. Not the tallest, but the biggest in terms of surface area. And it was designed to be the major retail offices for Marshall Fields and some of the other main retailers in the city, like Sears and Roebuck. Guys like that. It was a major flop. This building opened out as the most expensive building in Chicago. 1930, why might be hard to rent out office space? Yeah, you got an idea? The Great Depression, bingo. Brilliant answer, yeah. Great Depression, right before this building was opened, the stock market crashed. This building cost over $30 million to build. It was sold to Joseph Kennedy for only about $13 million. The Kennedy family owned that building for about 50 years. They eventually sold it for over $600 million. So pretty good investment by them. That building, by the way, is still the third biggest in the country in terms of just surface area. The only two that are bigger are the river. So you see there's one immediately to our right with that arch. That arch is not ornamentational, that's structural. It's helping support the building. And then just beyond that, you see that kind of pencil building. Looks like it's balancing on its tip. That was a very narrow plot of land that they were able to build on a very strong base there. This building immediately to our right as we turn, this green moving building right here, that was a direct response to Mies van der Rohe. That building opened in the 1980s, designed by the architectural firm Cohn, Pedersen & Fox. That's what we call a contextual or postmodern building. The idea is it fits directly into this spot. It's got green glass that reflects the green river, and there's a curve in that building that echoes the curve of the Chicago River there. And that's because people got sick of those boring Mies van der Rohe buildings, not contextual to their location. So people started to design these more interesting buildings. That was kind of the beginning of the wave in the early 1980s. And this next building we'll see on the other side of this river, the first building that we see here, is another one designed by the same firm. This building, if you look all the way to the top of it, which is a little bit difficult on a sunny day like this, but if you look at the top, there's a bridge spanning one side of the building to the other. It's not a real bridge. You can't walk across it, not if you have any sense in you anyway. You wouldn't walk across it. But it's designed that way specifically because we're on the river, we're surrounded by bridges. So they put a bridge into the actual design of the building. And then on either side of that bridge is what looks like a bridge house. So that was another 1980s building, late 1980s in that case, which started to contextualize most of this city's history. This river was considered an eyesore. Nobody liked to look at it, nobody liked to be near it, and the city's design followed suit. You see this beautiful Riverwalk just to our right? Has anybody been along that Riverwalk? A couple of people, not too many, but some have. Everybody has been on the Riverwalk at some point, and I know because our boat was docked at the Riverwalk. So everybody walked at least along a little portion of it. But if you haven't been along the entire Riverwalk yet, I highly recommend checking it out at some point. You can see right now there's people there all the time. It's become one of our most popular attractions, and that's interesting because it was not seen to be the case. He asked Carol Ross why did you design a Riverwalk? He said she designed all of this today. So what you'll notice is that each room you go through is a little bit different. They all bring a character. We saw some people fishing. There's restaurants and bars, and right here it's a lotto stand. There's a lot of things to see and do along the river, and it's become one of our most popular attractions. Something that was fun. It's a fundamental truth. The city itself is less than 200 years old, so there's still room for it to grow, and it does continue to do that. One of the things that Chicago is best known for is its architecture. One of the reasons it's best known for its architecture is because of that exact fact. The city is always changing and always growing. And so for many years in the history of our city, buildings were constructed and then torn down and replaced with newer, theoretically better buildings. So that's why I was talking earlier about the fact that most of the buildings you'll see along the river are relatively new. Along the river there aren't very many old buildings, and we're constantly changing the style of architecture. This building that's coming up immediately on the other side of this bridge is called the Southwacker Building. It's called the Southwacker Building because it's located in the corner of LaSalle, and it said, no building can be taller than 264 feet without being set back off the street and off the river. Why 264 feet, I couldn't tell you. But I can tell you the reason why they have to set buildings back is because a lot of people, and then all of a sudden we're in the postmodern era. And now we're in an era where a lot of the buildings kind of talk back and forth to each other. They reflect a lot of different styles. This building to our right on the other side of the bridge here is the Rio Dinette Building, that dark granite style building with the reflective glass windows and those jutting out corners. That architectural style to me is not as interesting as what's actually inside that building. Has anybody ever heard of Leo Burnett? Yeah, Leo Burnett himself is not all that famous, but a lot of his creations are. He's an advertising executive. The Leo Burnett Agency created the Pillsbury Doughboy, Tony the Tiger, the Jolly Green Giant, the Marlboro Man, Scat Crackle and Pop. A lot of those famous advertising characters came out of that advertising firm, not that building. That building was constructed in the 1980s. They were able to build it because they had made so much money and all the success they had with some of their characters. That's what they were trying to make it look like. That's the Carbide and Carbon Building. It was constructed for the Carbide and Carbon Battery Company back in the 1920s. It's a hotel now, one of the nicest hotels in the city. But at the time that it first opened, the company that hired the architects, they said, we want a building that looks as successful as we feel. So what's more successful than a bottle of champagne, right? They made it look like a bottle of champagne with actual gold on top of it. Real gold leaf, 24 carats, 25,000 for the inch thick. They don't build buildings out of actual gold anymore, but they did back in the roaring 20s. During an era of prohibition, by the way, when it was illegal to buy a bottle of champagne. There was nothing against making your building look like a bottle of champagne, so skirting the law a little bit. Ahead to the left, one of my favorite buildings in the city is the Whitney Building. That white building with the clock tower on the top of it. That's the first skyscraper that was built on the north side of this river. Up until the 1920s, everything was located to the south, which is on our right. That's because it was really difficult to get from one side of the river to the other. There were so many boats that passed through here all the time, the bridges were always up. That was until this bridge right in front of us, the Michigan Avenue Bridge, is the one that opened up the north side of the river. Now it's called the DuSable Bridge, which you know the reason for it. Came up almost immediately afterwards, opened in 1921 for the William Wrigley Company. Anybody know what was housed in the Wrigley building, what company it was? What product they sold? Anybody here Wrigley chewing gum? That's the company. That was perfect there. I love William Wrigley. He's one of my all-time favorite Chicagoans. William Wrigley was a soap salesman who used to give away packs of gum at all the soap sales until he realized that people like the gum better than they like the soap. So he stopped selling soap, he started selling gum, made a fortune, and he designed that building with the money that he made from it. The building to our left, the Chicago Tribune Building. It's another Frankenstein's monster of a building style. As you can see most of the way up, it's kind of a standard 1920s building. Limestone with those dark vertical stripes. And all the at the top of it, it becomes an elaborate French Gothic cathedral, which is just weird. Most architectural styles don't mesh, but I think they work out pretty well. That was the result of a competition held by the Chicago Tribune to design the world's most beautiful office building. I don't know if we achieved it. It's up to you to make that determination, I guess. But in 1925, that's what they considered. The reason they put that Gothic architecture on top of it is because Colonel Robert McCormick, who was the president of the Chicago Tribune at the time, had served in France during World War I, and he fell in love with French architecture. I like to think that the architects who designed that building, Howells and Hood, were just designing a standard 1920s Art Deco building, and then all of a sudden somebody burst into their office and said, hey, this guy loves French architecture, design a French building. But they didn't want to restart what they had already built. Really good opportunity for me to tell you why this river and why the lake are so important to our city's history. Does anybody know what the name of this river is? The river, right? Yes. That is correct. It's the Chicago River. I'm sorry to everybody who thought this was summer vacation that you didn't have to take quizzes. Yeah, I'm quizzing you. You are getting graded before you get out of here, too. This is the Chicago River, and that's a good tip going forward as well. If I ask a question, you just yell out Chicago. I'll give you partial credit, no matter what the answer is. So that's the answer here, Chicago River. Does anybody know why this is called the Chicago River? Because it's in Chicago.
It's in Chicago.
Partial credit to everybody. You don't get full credit because that's 100% wrong. Yeah, I'm switching things up on you. Maybe they're giving you bad information. Yeah, it's not called the Chicago River because it's in Chicago. It's actually the other way around. The city of Chicago was named after the river. The river came first. In fact, the entire reason that this city exists is because of the river. This is not a great river, all things considered. It's pretty narrow. You know, we can see one into the other. It's not very wide. It's not very deep. And it's not very long. We just went along the entire main branch of the Chicago River, and it took us like 15 minutes. We weren't moving all that fast. So the Chicago River is a pretty unimpressive body of water. So why then did an entire city sprout up along the Chicago River? Going around Chicago, I'll just tell you this. The answer is because of its location. Where we are in the country. Right in front of us is another big body of water. Does anybody know what body of water that is right in front of us?
Lake Michigan.
Lake Michigan, bingo. Yeah, we're right near Lake Michigan right now. So, if we wanted to, and we do, we could go out on the Lake Michigan right now. And if we also wanted to, which we don't for this one, we could use Lake Michigan to get through to the other Canada. Those 5 Great Lakes are the biggest reservoir of fresh water in the entire world. More than 20% of the entire world's supply of fresh water comes from the Great Lake. Lake Michigan is one of them. Does anybody know the other 4?
Lake Huron.
Superior. I think I heard Huron.
Yeah.
Which one are we missing? Ontario. There we go. You got them all 5. Huron, Ontario, Superior, Michigan, Erie. Those are the 5 Great Lakes. By traveling through the Great Lakes system, we can make our way out east to the St. Lawrence River, through some back channels and canals, and eventually make our way to the Atlantic Ocean. All without leaving this boat. We can go straight through to the Atlantic Ocean if we wanted to. We could also, if we wanted to, does anybody want to go to the Atlantic Ocean? I gotta ask the captain.
Yes.
I don't know if we're gonna make it in 90 minutes. Your parents may need to pick you up. So okay. I'll run it by the captain when we take a break a little bit later. We can also turn around though. We can head down the south banks of the Chicago River, go down to the Des Plaines, to the Illinois River. The Illinois River feeds into the Mississippi River. We can ride the Mississippi River all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. That means without leaving this boat, we can travel from the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. That was revolutionary when it was discovered in the 17th century for the first time by navigators.
Wow.
From the northeast down to the south, you had to travel by land. You weren't traveling by roads, you were traveling by horse and cart. And you were traveling over extremely rocky terrain. It was a dangerous trip and it took weeks. All of a sudden, this shortcut was discovered, and it became an advantageous place for traders to gather. And so the whole community settled around this river. And when you get a big community in a short period of time, it's great for the area, and in some ways it's really bad in other ways, specifically for the environment. This river is the reason that the city exists. The river was very good to the city. The city was not so good in return to the river. The city polluted this river something awful. They dumped all their trash into the river. They had a big meatpacking industry in Chicago. In fact, more than 75% of the world's meatpacking was done in Chicago in the late 19th century. And they dumped all the waste from the meatpacking plant into the river. Now, I'm guessing some of you just ate lunch, so I'm not going to get into specifics about what I mean when I say the meatpacking plant dumped their waste into the river. And suffice to say, it was pretty disposable river. Now, that's a stupid solution. It's ridiculous. It's never been done before. So why do they think they can do it? Well, they were able to do it because they're right near a continental divide, where the water would flow in the opposite direction. So what they did is they dug this deep canal, 28 miles long, deeper than the river. So they diverted the river water through this canal and across the continental divide, and it reversed the flow of the river. It had never been done before. It's never been done since. The Chicago River is the only river on the planet that has ever had its flow reversed by human beings. And so now, instead of the water flowing into Lake Michigan, it's flowing away from Lake Michigan. And that's great for a couple of reasons. Number one, our dirty water is not going into the lake anymore. And number two, the clean lake water is now flowing into the river, and it's actually cleaning up the river. Fantastic for us, not so great for other people. St. Louis in particular was upset with us. The city of St. Louis actually filed a lawsuit against the city of Chicago. They said, it was okay when you were polluting your own water, but now you're running that water down south to us, and we don't like it so much. The case went to the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of Chicago. Is anybody here from St. Louis? Good, because St. Louis is not a good city. And the Supreme Court, that's the Supreme Court said. They said, you lose St. Louis because St. Louis is a bad city. But what they actually said was, you're doing the same thing to your water that Chicago is doing to theirs. You're polluting it, and then you're running it all down south. So if you want to sue Chicago, pretty soon Memphis and New Orleans and a bunch of other cities are going to start suing you. St. Louis said, you know what, we're actually okay with it. We'll back off here. We don't mind that Chicago water after all. So St. Louis lost that case, but they weren't the only ones upset. A lot of the Great Lakes region was upset with Chicago. Minnesota, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. These states were unhappy with Chicago because now that Lake Michigan is running into the Chicago River, we were starting to drain Lake Michigan. In fact, in the first 30 years after the Chicago River was reversed, the depth of the lake actually decreased by close to a foot. It's a massive body of water that's losing a lot of water. And so they sued the Great Lakes states against the city of Chicago, and the Great Lakes states won their lawsuit. So we have to come up with a solution. The solution is exactly what we are sitting in right now. This boat was the solution all of it. No, it wasn't a boat. It was Roundabout, the Chicago Harbor Lock. It was constructed in the 1930s. This lock that we're in right now actually is able to regulate the amount of water that runs from the Chicago
The lock is closed.
into the Chicago River.
They're closing the lock.
There's two sets of gates. We just came into one set of gates. It's closing behind us right now. Now there's another set of gates in front of us. That's about to start opening. Once the gates behind us are closed, the gates in front of us start to open, and that way the water isn't flowing directly from the lake to the river. It has to stall in this lock. So we can actually determine at all times how much water is going from the lake into the river. This has become one of the busiest locks in the world because there is no way to get from the Chicago River to Lake Michigan or vice versa without going through this lock. It opens over 12,000 times per year. It's open to commercial boats, it's open to recreational boats. Anybody has access to this 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Including us right now. You are part of the 12,000. You can go home and brag to your friends about how you are part of the busiest lock in North America, or one of the busiest locks in North America.
Level is rising up. Now the lock is opening.
It's a very different body of water, much bigger than the river is, much more impressive, but it's actually a lot less important in terms of the history of our city. The city does not exist as a result of the lake, it exists because of the river. The lake has always been something, though, that we have been able to use to our benefit, right at the front, under the boat. The lake has been something we've tried to use to beautify our city. And that's something that Chicago hasn't always been known for. It hasn't been known for its beauty. In a lot of ways, it's been known for its ugliness, its industrialism, a lot of factories and warehouses in the history of Chicago. But in fact, in 1909, a man named Daniel Burnham was hired to draw up a plan for the entire city of Chicago. And his big idea was to make the city more accessible and more beautiful to the local public and for visitors alike. And part of his plan was to build giant boulevards, big parks, things that would attract people to the city. And he wanted to build a series of piers as well, municipal piers that would be recreational for the public and useful for the public to dock their boats there. Most of Daniel Burnham's plans did not come to fruition, but he did construct this pier just after the decade was constructed. from Bangladesh who was living in Chicago at the time, he came up with a solution. And he came up with a solution thanks to a pack of cigarettes. He turned that pack of cigarettes over. And if you ever seen, if you turn a pack of cigarettes over, the cigarettes will come out at different levels. And with the Sears Tower, it's in the top 20 tallest buildings in the world. There's been a huge skyscraper boom in Asia over the last few years. Specifically in China, they have most of the world's tallest. You take a guess as to what the second tallest building in the city is. If you don't know its name, you can describe it. Guess. The Hancock Building, which is that black tower over there, that's a good guess. It's actually number 5 though. And Hancock is the 5th tallest building in the city. Anybody got another guess as to what number 2 might be? Which one are you pointing at? The white one? Oh, the Trump Tower in front of us. Yeah, Trump Tower. No, not that one. Which one are we talking about? This white column over here, or the wavy one? Yeah, you got an idea? The curvy one, another good guess. The St. Regis Hotel, that's number 3. I did hear somebody say Trump Tower. That is number 2. Trump Tower is the one directly in front of us with the spire coming out the top of it. I don't have to describe that one too much, I don't think, because it also says Trump right across the middle of it, so it's pretty easy to spot. I'll talk a little bit more about that building when it gets to the river, because we'll get a better view of it from the river, and I've got a few stories about that. It's not so great for giant buildings that are exposed to the elements 12 months out of the year, especially in a city like Chicago, where it gets a tad chilly in the winter sometimes, occasionally. That building started to develop cracks in the facade almost immediately. They were just little cracks, not a huge problem, but they got bigger, bigger, and bigger. Until it got into the 1990s. In the early 1990s, the cracks were so big that they were afraid, the owners of the building at the time was Amoco, and they were afraid that chunks of that building were going to start falling off and falling to the ground below, which is a little bit scary because people would walk around that area. Show of hands, has anybody here ever had a chunk of marble fall on them from 1,000 feet up before? Well, almost as expensive to remodel as it was to build it in the first place. What did they do with the marble? Well, it was owned by Amoco at the time. So Amoco took all of that marble and they brought it to their refinery in Indiana. And if you ever go to the Amoco refinery in Indiana, look at the driveways. They're all paved with expensive Carrara marble. $80 million driveways. I'm guessing, I don't have any facts to back this up, I'm guessing those are the most expensive driveways in the world. I've never seen them myself. I'm not in the habit of going to oil refineries on field trips. But if you ever do find yourself there, it might be worth looking at. So that is the 4th tallest building in Chicago. I told you I've talked about 1, 4, and 5. I'll talk about 2 and 3 when we're out on the river. One of the things I love about...
We're opening the app now, so we can go back to the city. From Lake Michigan cruise back to Chicago Riverwalk.
I recognize that railroads were the method of transportation for people. People weren't going to be traveling by boat anymore. They're going to be traveling by, we're out of space. Where do we start building? Start building up. Chicago became the inventor of the skyscraper. Now, a lot of people will claim that they invented the skyscraper. A lot of different buildings were claimed to have been the first skyscrapers, and they all have some legitimate claim to it, probably. Because the definition of what actually constituted a skyscraper was always a little bit different. But to me, the most important building of all was called the Home Insurance Building. The Home Insurance Building was designed here in Chicago in 1881. It was designed by a man named William LeBaron Jennings. William LeBaron Jennings was a bridge builder. Now keep in mind, in this era, buildings were all supported by their walls. So if the building was made out of brick, out of stone, out of wood, whatever the building material was, the walls were load bearing. William LeBaron Jennings realized that he built bridges out of iron and steel. If you took the bridge on its end, it would stand up. So why not try doing the same thing with a building? And so he created the steel frame skyscraper. When you build the skeleton out of steel and iron, the walls just become curtains. They're curtain walls. You can put the bricks or the stones or whatever around the structure of the building, actually supporting the weight. So now all of a sudden we can build buildings that are not just 4 or 5 stories tall. We can make them 10, 12, 15 stories. The Home Insurance Building is 10 stories. They work so well, they actually... So Chicago immediately became known for its skyscrapers. At one point, Chicago had more than half of the skyscrapers that it's ever built. That's no longer true. But we still have these beautiful skylines because people became Chicago the steel frame skyscrapers became known as the Chicago School of Architecture. So we already talked about 1893 then becoming the city's coming out party. The city kept growing, so 1893, we unleashed Chicago on the world. In 1933, we hosted another World's Fair. That one took place out by the museum campus. It started there, 12th Street, and extended all the way to 5th Avenue. There was an avenue we were building our first year called After Heaven, which is where we started our tour. The river is now extended further to the left, and the reason is because of the height as far as the eye can see. It's always a view that the city is out here like that. Well, Chicago, blue, all the beautiful lights that come with it. Chicago is reflected into the water. Designed by a woman was that one right there. Not the triangle building, the one right behind the triangle building with the wavy white balconies. That is the Aqua Tower. That was also designed by Navy Pier, same architect. Designed it about 10 years earlier, opened in 2000. There's some beautiful hotels too, that triangle building right there. That's the Swiss Hotel. The reason that building is a triangle is because it was designed by a man named Harry Deese, who's just obsessed with triangles. But that one is actually a triangle. You have two sides of it that are facing the river instead of just one. It also creates really good view from behind the building as well. This is like the Aqua Tower. Look straight ahead. Trump Tower is right there. Second tallest building in the city. When it was originally designed, it was supposed to be the tallest building in the world. They ended up changing the design around. Adrian Smith was the architect of that building. Adrian Smith is a Chicago architect. He designed Trump Tower. It was not the tallest building in the world, but he did eventually design a building in Dubai called the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world. The Burj Khalifa is not supposed to remain the tallest building in the world for very long. There's another one in Saudi Arabia called Jeddah Tower that is supposed to surpass the Burj Khalifa. If it gets finished, it's been on hold for a while. If it does get finished to its original specifications, it'll be the first building ever that is a foot to tall. That was also designed by Adrian Smith. Adrian Smith was born in Chicago. He attended college in Chicago. He set up his office in Chicago. Chicago no longer has the tallest building in the world. We do still have the tallest building architects in the world. We're still exporting the tallest buildings in